Now, if you remember my last video, you will recall that I said that Halloween Ends was a disappointing entry for the Halloween season, and was in fact probably the worst way the series could have gone out. After all, for a king of horror to go out in such a bad way, it definitely leaves a bad taste for the holiday season. But that begs the question, what is the best horror film for Halloween? Or might be the best horror film in general? Especially when you have so many classics out there, and so many new, intriguing, and just as brutal horror films out there. Horror films have existed ever since the art of film has existed, with one of the first horror films and one of the first films ever invented was a take on Nosferatu. And with so many horror films that came after it, it begs the question, what's the greatest of all time? Or at least, what's my opinion? This was not an easy choice, but it was in my opinion, there is only one horror film that I feel could be defined as the greatest, and certainly a good choice for the Halloween season. Not only with its scares, but with its characters, with its setting, and with its visuals, it knocks everything out of the park. That film is John Carpenter's The Thing. When The Thing was released back in the 80s, it was a big financial flop, and it was vastly hated by most people on its arrival, as most people at the time were more interested in family-friendly alien films, with the release of E.T. wiping out the box office and completely ruining The Thing's chances. This was a new low for John Carpenter, who had recently just come off the success of the Halloween franchise. Yet, surprisingly enough, nowadays The Thing has gained a cult following, with so many people who now appreciate it for what it was, and for what it did for horror. Me, I'm one of those people. The Thing is an absolute masterclass of horror in all the right ways. As with most horror films, especially with John Carpenter's previous ones, there's always been a tough line to cross with horror films, because you have to both show an interesting and engaging story, have immersive terror and good horror, and you gotta have good characters that we can actually root for. And The Thing knocks that thing out the park with flying colours. Let's go over the characters first. The main one is MacReady, who was performed excellently. He's the main character of the film, and is one of the sole survivors at the end. MacReady is definitely a showing of the time. He's certainly an 80s action hero in the making. But it's not only MacReady that we care about, unlike with the Halloween series, where you only care about a few people and everyone else is just pretty much ready to be slaughtered. In this film, it makes you care about all of the characters, with John Carpenter carefully using subtle character developments, subtle techniques to make us know more about each character and how their mind works, who they are, and what they mean to the other people. All from MacReady talking to people on the computer with a bottle of beer in his hand. But one thing I appreciate about The Thing a lot more than I do most other horror films is the way it introduces horror. It goes about it in a completely different way to most other horror films. Yeah, this film doesn't rely on shock value alone. Sure, there are shocking moments, especially with The Thing itself, but this film draws you in and keeps you on edge through the use of paranoia. Now, paranoia is an incredibly underutilized thing in horror media. It can be so effective if it's done right, as The Thing proves, and it's a formula that has to be followed to a perfect T, because it can easily go wrong, as we saw with The Thing's prequel. And the way the film uses paranoia is that it never gives you a clear answer about who's the thing. It throws many red herrings at you to suggest that someone could be a thing, but you never truly know. That's the brilliance of it. It's the fact that you have to come up with your own interpretation, and even that might not make sense. And that's the true masterclass of filmmaking when it came to The Thing. You never know who's the thing, and when they are, or who's infected at what time. It leaves you guessing, and even nowadays, the mystery of The Thing is still talked about today, as there's no clear answer. And it's such a widespread topic that, really, there probably isn't an answer. John Carpenter made it so it was that vague that I don't think we'll ever find a true conclusion to it. And in a way, that adds to the terror of it. The fact that we'll never get a clear answer. Whether or not we're doomed, whether or not we're safe, we have no idea. And when you leave people to wonder what to fear, instead of showing them to fear, it could be surprisingly more effective, especially when you care about the characters and you care about what they have to go through. Now, one thing not many people know about The Thing is that it's actually a remake of another film called The Thing from Another World, based off a book, I believe. And that old 50s film, John Carpenter loved so much that his remake paid a lot of tribute to it while adding on top of it. In fact, he loved the film so much he included it in the first Halloween. And the John Carpenter remake, got featured in Halloween Ends. It just goes to show that The Thing and Halloween have had such a strong connection for so many years. Now let's talk about the main thing that people will come to this movie to see, and that's the alien itself, the thing itself. And I love how vague they make the creature. You never get a true understanding of where it is and where it came from, what it is. It's some meaty organism that takes a host and infects them to make an exact copy of them. And you're always going to be left to wonder who's a thing and who's not a thing. There is so much going on here. And the effects, they are absolutely disgusting. They're so good, yet they're just utterly revolting to look at. Such as when the thing takes possession of the dogs, or when we see them infecting a human. It's absolutely disgusting and nasty, and I'm entirely here for it. And the thing is a real threat, as considering the isolation that the characters are in, this thing becomes an even bigger threat to the thought that this thing could get out into a city, and the fact that they have to destroy all transport. No one can trust each other because one person might be the thing. It builds on that paranoia of you can't trust anyone. Nowhere is this more prominent than in that ending. The ending is perfection. It's so vague that I love it. MacReady and Charles are the last ones left, and Charles went off into the store. We have no idea whether or not he's a thing or not. There's many possibilities saying that he could be a thing, and I know that there was a sequel comic that said he was a thing, but I don't really like to consider those comics canon. I like the vagueness of this. You never really know who's a thing and who isn't a thing, or whether or not they're both a thing. You never get a clear understanding, and there's so much vagueness and potential in this scene that the audience is pretty much abandoned with their own imagination to play with. All of these masterful techniques were done on such a simple idea, and that's what John Carpenter does best. He takes a simple idea and runs with it. The simpler, the better. After all, everyone loves Halloween, and when you think about it, it's just a guy who broke out of jail and started going to a town and just slashing people. That's pretty much the whole movie. But it's done in a way that's so effective that you feel every single second of it. Same with this movie. It's basically just people trapped in location with monster who's who. That's the thing you have to wonder. A simple idea can be masterful with the acting, with the characters, with the way it's filmed. Everything is done so well, with long one takes being in the film to help emphasize the emptiness and yet the paranoia that something is out there but you just don't know where it is. In terms of problems, I really can't see any problems with this movie. There are so much things that go on that you just have to enjoy it and feel terrified of it. Sure, the vagueness might be a bit too much for people. People would definitely say this is confusing, but it's definitely worth a think about. It gets your mind intrigued like a murder mystery. You wonder who's who. It plays with your mind, and you know a horror film did something good when it leaves an impression on you. Hell, The Thing's legacy has lived on to this day, with it inspiring a very big trend recently with Among Us. The whole idea of Among Us is basically a copy of The Thing. I'm not saying Among Us is bad, but you could definitely see that there was some inspiration taken. There's a reason why there is no sequel to The Thing. It's because there is no way you can top this. This is perfection incarnate. The most they ever tried to do was make a prequel, but that never went well, so they completely just abandoned the franchise. And honestly, I'm fine with that. The Thing had its time in the limelight, and it's going to be remembered for years to come as the peak horror. and all from a simple idea of isolation. Alien films seem to be really good at the idea of isolation, with the first Alien film and Predator being a very good example of this, with both having the character with a whole group in the beginning in an isolated spot, with one being picked off one by one. And again, it's that vagueness of if something's out there or not that it perfects the horror. There's been many good horror films, many that some people could say it was better than The Thing, but I want to know what you think. So I want to know what you think is the best horror film, and maybe why it's the best horror film to you. Leave it in the comments, I want to know. And before I go, let me just wish you all a happy Halloween, and I'll see you all next time.